Donald Trump goes wild. That comes after Judge Chutkan reverses herself on her gag order. And this is temporary. She knows that Donald Trump is filing an appeal saying, what are you talking about? How can you possibly gag me in the middle of an election season when I'm being prosecuted by Joe Biden, my chief political opponent? Does that seem fair at all? And she says, well, we're going to use local rule, whatever, 57.7C. She said, well, because I'm so scared of some possibilities that maybe some Trumpers are going to hurt somebody sometime somewhere doing something somehow, then we have to protect them. And so she says, all interested parties in this matter, this was the original order, including the parties in their counsel, are prohibited from making any public statements that target the special counsel prosecuting this case, Jack Smith, or his staff. Now, Trump, after that order went into place, he kind of put the lid on it, right? He wasn't talking so much about it. Also, defense counsel, she's throwing a bone to the defense, and any of this court staff or personnel, or this was the big one, this catch-all, any reasonably foreseeable witness or the substance of their testimony. You go, whoa, what? Like maybe the first one, the second one, and the third one, you can kind of, okay, whatever. But the fourth one, any reasonably foreseeable witness or the substance of their testimony, that's like everybody. It's not even specific. What do you mean foreseeable witness? There's like 1,000 people in this case, at least. So what is she talking about? So, okay, that was the original order. Now Trump filed his appeal and Chutkan reversed herself. And here is the entry on this, very short. It is a minute entry order. And then as soon as we read this, we're going to see what Trump gets into because, man, he just goes wild on this thing. So she drops this one. She says on October 20th, after Trump notices that she's going to be appealed on that prior order, says upon consideration of Trump's opposed motion for a stay pending the appeal. In other words, the judge will just hold on to this thing, say you're not gagged until I get further guidance from the Court of Appeals, saying that it is hereby ordered that the court's order and their opinion is administratively stayed to permit the parties to brief and the court to consider Trump's motion. It is further ordered that the government shall file any opposition by October 25, and Trump's going to reply 3 days later. Signed by Judge Chutkan. And so stayed means that's on pause, right? That is not in effect. And so Trump then has the opportunity to basically say whatever he wants about this within reason, right? And just to be clear about this, Trump can't break the law. Trump can't threaten and harass people. It's already illegal to do that. Trump can't influence and tamper with witnesses and all of those things, but he can call them out by name. And of course, let's take a look at what Trump says here right after a quick message from our friends. These are Trump's posts on Truth Social. And he, of course, is going wild now that the gag order has been lifted. And here are a couple of his posts. Here was one. He published this one. He said, the failing New York Times story leaked by deranged Jack Smith. Oh, there it is. That's the name. He wasn't allowed to say that, but now he is. And the Biden political opponent abuser DOJ about a red-haired weirdo from Australia named Anthony Pratt is fake news. I never spoke to him about submarines. I don't even know what this story is, but he says, but I did speak to him about creating jobs in Ohio and Pennsylvania, because that's what I'm all about. Jobs, a great economy, low taxes, no inflation, energy dominance, strong borders, no endless wars, and low interest rates, and much more. Maggie Haberman and the Misfits never called me for comment. Why would they? They just write anything they want. Whether it's correct or not is of zero importance to them. All the news that's unfit to print. That's why we call it fake news. All right, that's from Trump, right? Now, the first thing that stands out on this one is this post, this Truth Social post, was illegal just not too long ago. Okay, deranged Jack Smith, he was not allowed to say that at all. And that would have been a sanctionable offense, right? You violated a court order, order to show cause, brought him in there, scolded him, maybe fined him, done whatever. Or literally, like, could hold him in jail at some point, right? It might take a while for her to get there, but she theoretically could. And by the way, like, if this was not a former president, if this was somebody who was, in a different position and they violated a court order, not that Trump has, right? They would do that. I've seen that happen. I've seen judges, enough of this, right? You're going right into custody. Now, there are complexities here because that is a regular defendant and not a president. And we also are in a situation where that might be justified, but this is a political prosecution and they're gagging him without legitimacy. So any type of recourse in response to Trump, in my opinion, is also illegitimate, right? So as we've said, now I'm never encouraging anybody here to violate a court order, the president included, even if it is illegitimate. But the point is, at some point, right, Trump might make that decision on his own. You have this immovable force going against an unstoppable object, and they're just hitting each other. It's the justice system and the free speech rights of Trump. And boom, as soon as the order comes down, deranged Jack Smith is out on full display. But that wasn't it. Trump also posted some other things. And again, we're hearing about witnesses. That was the Judge judge's order. And she also talked about another gag order. Now, in the other gag order, this one is talking about the New York case. Remember, Letitia, he calls her Peekaboo James, but he's talking about that gag order because the New York gag order under Judge Engoron is a little bit more narrow, okay? The January 6th order that we just read said any reasonably foreseeable witness that might be involved. You know, like, what on earth? That's like 1,000 people. Like Ray Epps is in that list, maybe, you know, because it was January 6th. It was a huge thing. So now we're asking the same thing, you know, in the New York case, that provision was not in there. The judge was only talking about the judge, and so it's a more narrow order. So now he is responding to her, and I tie these together because the DC case referenced this type of conduct to justify her order. In other words, Judge Chutkan was saying Trump was harassing the New York judge's court clerk, the one who was whispering in her ear, Chuck Schumer's girlfriend, or whatever Trump said. And that was essentially cause enough to justify Chutkan's authority to gag him in this case. So the DC judge looks over to New York, sees what Trump says about New York, makes decisions based on that, even though it didn't happen in her jurisdiction. So here's what Trump says about Tishy. He says, all right, look, in the fake Biden-inspired fraud case against me, brought by the corrupt Attorney General, Letitia Peekaboo James of New York State, a sadly crime-infested place, CIP, capitalized, where people and businesses are fleeing to other states in record numbers, it is her and the highly partisan judge, Judge Engoron, who has been overturned many times, who defrauded me and the public by valuing my assets at a fraction of what they are worth in order to try and convict me, without a trial or a jury, of fraud. She got him to value Mar-a-Lago at $18 million, when it is worth 50 to 100 times that amount. My assets are worth much more than the listed on the 100% disclaimed financial statements. And there are no victims except me. We won on the statute of limitations and other things at the appeals court, and this all capitalized moving forward. And this radical left, Trump-hating judge refuses to accept their decision. This case should be dropped immediately. It's amazing. He is out of control and totally afraid of Peekaboo, a complete miscarriage of justice and election interference. Multiple capital letter sentences there, and I feel it too, man. It is out of control. It's insane what's happening. It's all over the place. It's like crazy town. And to somebody who loves the law, you know, and practiced law for a long time and built a law firm around it, who cherishes the law, reveres the Constitution, loves the logic of it, made my life around it, it is insane to even think about what's happening all over the place and how even other lawyers, okay, are not speaking out about it. And, you know, there's a lot of them out there just like, well, it's like, it reminds me of that meme of that dog sitting in that burning house, right? A lot of other lawyers out there also know what's happening, but a lot of them are just staying quiet about it when it's happening in their jurisdictions, like in DC, like in New York. Like, where are the New York criminal defense attorneys or the DC criminal defense attorneys? I mean, I know they're out there, but I mean, you know, as a general organization, like the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and all these big other entities, like, where are they as all of our historical, you know, precedent is just being shattered every single day? I don't know. It is out of control, Trump. I feel it, and I agree with the exclamation points. But this is another one from Trump. He said, this is the fake news one, and he had one more. He said about Washington, D.C., which is where Judge Chutkan resides. And a big part of the order was about Trump influencing the jury pool, right? Every time Trump speaks, it wakes people up and it's accurate. And so the left doesn't want that to happen at all. Every time, you know, Trump gets indicted, his poll points go up, and they need to gag him to stop this momentum. How does he keep growing? It's like every time he gets attacked, he engulfs their energy and becomes stronger. So he posted this about D.C. He said here, Washington, D.C. has become a dirty, crime-ridden death trap that must be taken over and properly run by the federal government. I might disagree with that one. It is and will be part of my election platform. We will clean it, renovate it, and rebuild it. And most importantly, make it safe. Right now, it is probably the most unsafe capital city anywhere in the world. And with this in mind, there is no way I can get a fair trial on a Biden election interference indictment in D.C. Obviously, at the appropriate time. If this ridiculous case should be allowed to proceed forward, which is, according to legal scholars, very doubtful, I will be making a demand for a venue change. Well, there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, I would prefer that D.C. be disbanded, and I think that our representatives and our senators could all do with a little less together time. You know what I'm saying? You separate them back in their home states, and you can move different conventions around the country, but they don't all need to infest themselves in the gutters of D.C. any longer. We're tired of it. But that's a separate point. Now, I'm not a legal scholar, I'll admit that, but I have to share my concerns. I think that they're going to do everything humanly possible on this to get this case to trial. I have my doubts that this thing gets dismissed. I know that sounds crazy. I know, but we've been saying things sound crazy for as long as we've been here. It just gets crazier every day. So I think that they're going to want to convict him. him. They're going to try to get this case. The judge is going to do everything humanly possible to make the case stick. The Court of Appeals could come down, the Supreme Court could come in and deviate the plan, right? But unless that's the case, man, this is going to go. Like, they are going to do everything possible. This judge is not going to let this case go until after the election. I think most of their eggs are in this basket, quite frankly. The RICO case by Big Fanny's not looking good. We'll get there in another segment. Florida case, that's Judge Cannon. They can't control that one as much. They're having difficulties there. Alvin Bragg's case is a joke. It's not even relevant. It's from 2015 and 16. And so this is the one. Hate feeling miserable the day after drinks? I did too. Luckily, a game-changing product called ZBiotics is here to help. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for the rough next day. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut, where you need it most. Just remember to drink ZBiotics before drinking alcohol, drink responsibly, and get a good night's sleep to feel your best the next day. That's it. Pretty easy. I wish I had this during law school. Here's how it works. They come in little bottles, very convenient. You give one a good shake, twist the top off, slam it back, and you're done. Easy. Tastes delicious, goes down smooth. I got the 6-pack, which looks like this. It comes with an instructional booklet inside that gives you more details on how to use it and how it works. A very simple twist top right here. And of course, the reminder to drink responsibly is printed on every bottle, which is always very important. And that's coming from a former criminal defense attorney. So this Halloween, pair your candy and your cocktails with ZBiotics to avoid a spooky next morning. Go to zbiotics.com/RobertG or scan the QR code on the screen right now to get 15% off your first order when you use Robert G at checkout. You can also sign up for a subscription using my code so you can stay prepared no matter the time or the occasion. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/RobertG and use the code RobertG at checkout for 15% off. Thank you to ZBiotics for sponsoring this episode. So Trump, I hope he's got better legal scholars than my analysis here. I'm sure he does. And I hope they're right about it, but I do have my concerns. Now, Trump is obviously upset about this and he's out campaigning. And so he's got a couple things to say before we jump into the actual gag order that he's trying to overturn. We'll read through the analysis that his attorneys prepared for us. But this is what he said when they were out speaking, campaigning across America.
A highly partisan judge, a real political guy right out of the clubhouses. And he's been overturned many times by the appellate courts, and he defrauded me. They defrauded me because I have a house that's very valuable, and they try and make it like increasing values. And honestly, it's a very conservative number, but they valued a house that's worth 100 times more than the number they used. Let's say 50 to 100. They valued it at $18 million, and people say it's worth anywhere from 50 to 100 and maybe even that more. They defrauded me. He called me a fraud before I even got to court.
So Trump is speaking out about this, and he's, kind of tap dancing around. He's going to be tiptoeing around a lot of this stuff. So the New York gag order is a lot less broad, a lot more narrow. And so he has a little bit more leeway there. But remember, every time he speaks, Chutkan is listening to that and then incorporating that into her order. So I want to share now the actual argument that Trump is making. Like, what caused Chutkan to reverse this? And then this is the same argument, or large portions of what we'll see when the appellate memorandum is ultimately filed. Okay, so we'll see the appeal in full fruition when they draft that and submit that. But this is a pretty substantive overview of it. And so let's see what they have inside here. You can see this one's about 33 pages, and we'll see how long it goes, and we'll hit the highlights of it. But it is filed out of the District of Columbia, and this is President Trump's opposed motion, right? Jack Smith did not want this to happen, for a stay pending the appeal. And we're reading this for the appellate portion of this, like something in here caused Chutkan to reverse. So Trump's lawyers, they tell us, Your Honor, Judge Chutkan, no court in American history has has imposed a gag order on a criminal defendant who is campaigning for public office, least of all on the leading candidate for president of the United States. So, Your Honor, in other words, this has never happened before, ever. Not for any candidate, not somebody running for mayor or dog catcher, but you just did it for the first time, and she did it through a local order. Did you see that? It was like local rule 70, so whatever, DC rules, somebody wrote on the back of a napkin. Trump's team says this court's opinion and order is the first of its kind. And given its extraordinary nature, one would expect an extraordinary and compelling justification for the gag. But that is conspicuously absent. Instead, the court generically states that it must enter the gag order to prevent supposed threats and harassment, in quotes. This theory falters under even minimal scrutiny. First, as the prosecution Jack Smith concedes, President Trump has not unlawfully threatened or harassed anyone. So unsurprisingly, the prosecution presents no witness who they say feels threatened or harassed by Trump. Not a person. In fact, when asked at oral argument about evidence supporting this concern, Jack Smith's prosecutor said, well, of course this prejudice is speculative. We're not going to know if these witnesses are intimidated or if this threatening activity is intimidating other witnesses until folks testify at trial. And even then, we may not know. So it's all speculative, right? They're just making it up in their head. They're like, well, it could happen. Trump says things and people do get freaked out, so maybe it'll happen here. And we made this point a long time ago, saying that Trump is going to insurrect America again, right? That's always been the talking point. He caused one insurrection, and so we have to stop him from insurrecting again. One way to do that is gagging him so that he cannot speak. Now, she's not saying that here, but that's essentially what she's saying. The court likewise cited no evidence on this point, made no specific findings, meaning the judge never said that there was any actual harm at all, and declined to give any meaningful consideration to the prosecution's lack of proof. They say these are fatal omissions. You can't just gag somebody without articulating the reason for it. A prior restraint, which is something that limits your ability to speak, okay? You are restrained prior to even saying something. It is such a major component of free speech. If you can't go out there and say something and somebody restrains you from that, that's a limit. So it cannot be based on speculation. Rather, the prosecution must actually demonstrate, according to case law, quote, a clear and present danger. So unable to justify the gag order based on Trump's actions, the prosecution pivots to third parties, right? Because Trump didn't do anything, so they got to say somebody else did, saying that unnamed others outside of Donald Trump's control, President Trump, acted improperly before this case began. Such concerns cannot justify this gag. The Supreme Court has repeatedly explained that citizens of this country cannot be censored based on the fear of what others might do, says Brandenburg case from 1969 U.S. Supreme Court. This case says the constitutional guarantees of free speech and free press do not permit a state to forbid or to proscribe advocacy, except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. Okay, that's the Brandenburg test that you hear a lot about. It's this two-part test. You see this and here? In order for the state to be able to limit your free speech, we have to have a two-part test. One, the speech is directed to incite, right? It's causing, it will direct, like the intention of the speech, the person doing the speaking, is directing it to incite imminent lawless action or incitement, and it is likely to actually cause that. Okay, so if somebody's just saying something, but it's not actually going to lead to that, that doesn't satisfy the second half of the test. So if some crazy person's just like, oh, let's go insurrect the Capitol, kind of like, the night before when Ray Epps was doing it. Okay, he was like inciting, like we're going into the Capitol the night before, but nobody was doing it. So, right, maybe it didn't actually produce that action. But the next day, right, you would say that maybe he would have met both standards because he was inciting, he was directing people into the Capitol, and it was likely to produce that action, right? He's into the Capitol, even the day of, guiding people to the Capitol building. So that's one example where, if Ray Epps was doing the same thing, inciting people, a month before January 6th, it's not likely to produce an action, so that would fail. So the point is, right, that's sort of talking in a criminal context, but you get how the test works. Now, equally important, the government, Jack Smith, submitted, and the court considered no evidence, zero, on the critical question of whether alternative non-speech restricting measures might be effectively advanced to protect the witnesses. If people are scared about being attacked by Trump's advocates or whatever, what else can we do? This resulted in a breathtakingly overbroad gag order that, outside of a handful of narrow exceptions, prohibits any public comment regarding a wide and undefined set of individuals and subjects, right? It's monster. Any reasonable foreseeable witness is what the judge says. So in doing so, the gag order, it shields public officials in the highest echelons of government from criticism, and that includes key political rivals. Trump's defense continues. At the bottom, gag order violates virtually every very fundamental principle of our First Amendment jurisprudence. It imposes an overbroad, content-based prior restraint on the leading presidential candidate's core political speech. Notwithstanding the Supreme Court's instruction that the First Amendment rights have their fullest and most urgent application precisely in the conduct of campaigns for political office, where you're making your redress of grievances. You're saying the institution of the DOJ and the DC Circuit are illegitimate. You are running on that, and you want to change that. And the American people see you say that, and they want you to say that because they're going to vote for you for that. And then the court says, well, you can't talk bad about our prosecutors, who are totally legitimate, and you can't talk bad about our courts. What? That's the whole point of politics. Now, likewise, by restricting President Trump's speech, the gag order eviscerates the rights of us, my friends, of us, his audiences, including hundreds of millions of American citizens who the court now forbids from listening to Trump's thoughts on important issues. And I was furious about this when they threw him off Twitter, too. How dare they deny us the right to hear from him? Now, neither the prosecution nor the court come close to justifying these restrictions. Instead, in a dizzying irony, the gag order lists a long list of Supreme Court cases that protect civil rights of criminal defendants in hopes of silencing the criminal defendant in this case. This is a violation of the First Amendment, and it's egregious and intolerable. And so accordingly, this judge should immediately stay the gag order pending appeal. They say that Trump, as we know, is the 45th president of the United States and the leading candidate in the election that's coming up. He has dominating leads in the Republican nomination race, and he leads President Biden, the executive who's currently prosecuting him in general election polling. Trump's political speech reaches the largest audience in American history, including over 100 million followers on social media across several platforms and countless other citizens who listen to President Trump's messages in person, TV, and elsewhere. And so the prosecution filed this indictment. Now, as this case is pending, Trump continues to campaign for president, and one of his core messages is specifically that these prosecutions against him are part of an unconstitutional strategy to attack and silence the Biden administration's chief political rival. To advance this message, Trump has made many public statements criticizing individuals that he believes are wrongly prosecuting him, including Biden, Garland, Jack Smith, and his team. And this viewpoint, which is his political opinion that the prosecution is politically motivated, is one shared by countless Americans, including myself and many of you. On September 15th, the prosecution filed a motion to impose a gag order on Trump. They keep thinking that this action is going to hurt Trump, and they indict him. Polls go up and up and up. They get a mugshot released, and people make t-shirts about it. So they try to gag him. They seek sweeping restrictions on his political speech, and they made three main arguments. One, they claim that he was prejudicing the jury pool. They say that second, that Trump was attempting to undermine confidence in the criminal justice system, which they're doing themselves, by prejudicing the jury pool. And third, the expansive content-based restrictions were necessary to prevent threats and harassments to third parties. That was Jack Smith's argument. One, juries. Two, confidence in the justice system in general. And then three, that it was necessary to protect the people. So now the court declined to adopt the first argument, and for good reason. There's no evidence that the jury pool has been affected by any of this. And the court also declined to credit the prosecution's amorphous and constitutionally invalid concern about, quote, public confidence in the court's ruling. Instead, the judge did something pretty sneaky here. In crafting the gag order, the court looked to the prosecution's last argument and said that witnesses and prosecutors and court personnel have somehow, miraculously, been intimidated or harassed. However, in making this claim, the prosecution did not present any evidence that Trump harassed anyone. Rather, the prosecution relied exclusively on the allegation that third parties with no relationship to Trump engaged improperly with political actors, most of whom had already been criticized by millions of people across the country before Trump even commented on them. Trump comments on stories once they've already gotten big. Okay, these people come into Trump's zone when they've already reached, the mainstream. So he's already commenting on them. So the prosecution also, and they're general people, also the prosecution did not submit any evidence that one, any member of its team has been threatened or harassed. So nobody on Jack Smith's, very sensitive team over there, highlighter team, has been harassed. That any potential witness has actually felt threatened or harassed by Trump's speech. That Trump made any public statement about any court staff other than the judge herself, which he's allowed to, or that any alleged threat, harassment, or intimidation could not be addressed by other means. Never addressed any of that, Judge. Nonetheless, Chutkan entered the gag order, and it stops Trump from making statements that target Special Counsel Smith or any reasonably foreseeable witness and their testimony. Now, in entering the gag order, the court relied heavily heavily on the anticipated reactions, whatever they just expected, of unidentified independent third parties to Trump's speech. So Trump says something, some made-up entity, probably domestic homegrown violent MAGA extremists that Joe Biden was talking about from his Gates of Hell speech. The court found that when the defendant, Trump, has publicly attacked individuals, including on matters related to this case, they get threatened and harassed. But the court cited no evidence that Trump's statements, as distinct from the statements of others, caused the harassment. Right now we're talking about causation. You're saying that these people were harassed. Show me the statement from Trump that caused the third party to do the harassing. So they say there isn't any, okay? Notwithstanding the complete lack of evidence, the court found that Trump's statements pose a, quote, significant and immediate risk, and that witnesses will be intimidated, and that they could be targeted for harassment and blah, blah, blah. They say, based on these perfunctory findings, unsupported by evidence, the court imposed sweeping restrictions on Trump's core political speech. And then the court, which we read, then the court entered a carve-out. Now they said, this order shall not be construed to prohibit Trump from making statements criticizing the government generally. That's good, because he's in a campaign. Thank you, Judge, for permission. Including the current administration or the DOJ. So he can say, like, the DOJ is corrupt, but not Jack Smith. Statements asserting that Trump is innocent, he's allowed to say that, or that his persecution is politically motivated, or statements, okay, his prosecution is politically motivated, but he can't presumably talk about Jack Smith because she already said that by name, or statements criticizing the campaign platforms or policies of current political rivals like Mike Pence, I guess, would be allowed. So they say, okay, thanks, Judge, for those really ridiculous carve-outs. Now, despite the extraordinary breadth of these restrictions, the court held in conclusory fashion that Trump's statements pose sufficiently grave threats to the integrity of the proceedings that cannot be addressed by any other alternative means, and it's tailored its order to meet those threats. But the court did not explain, as it must, how nearly all public statements regarding hundreds of individuals and topics, sans the three narrow carve-outs, how those statements pose a clear and present danger to any compelling interest, meaning it's not constitutional to limit Trump's free speech. It is a constitutional right violation to stop him from being able to speak during a campaign while he's being prosecuted. Now, nor did the court cite any evidence or provide any analysis to support its conclusion that less restrictive means were unavailable to address the threats. It did not address any alternative means at all. So when you're in law school and you do a called strict scrutiny analysis, the government does something that impinges upon somebody's constitutional rights, and you say, can the government do that? And you ask yourself, is this the least restrictive thing that the government can do, and is it absolutely necessary to achieve a compelling government interest? Those two things are met, usually you'll find that the government can do the thing, but it has to be, there is no other alternative. There's nothing less restrictive that the government can do. It's the absolute last resort. And the judge didn't even do that analysis, didn't even ask, like, could we hire private security for these witnesses? Or could Trump, anything else, basically the court could do. Now, the statements above were the sum total of the court's finding. That's it. That's all she found regarding its constitutionally mandated task to narrowly tailor its order and to exhaust all of the alternative means before gagging Trump. And so the judge, because she didn't do that, the analysis is so bad. They're going to give us what the legal standards are for appeal and all the things. And they're going to tell us that, this is going to be equitable. And we'll fast forward to the conclusion. They say, listen, for the reasons stated above, the court should stay the gag order pending the conclusion of all the appellate proceedings challenging it. The court should also immediately enter a temporary administrative stay to remain in effect pending the outcome of this ruling. Bunch of stuff here. Now, if the court does not enter a temporary administrative stay, we respectfully request that the court issue a ruling, and the court has obviously done that. And so the gag order has been, in fact, temporarily lifted, and there are many things to glean from this. The question is, does Chutkan think that there maybe is a basis for an appeal, or is she doing this formulaically? We don't know. But we do have some thoughts on this and some reaction. So in Trump's gag order out of New York, we turn our attention over to this news site, and they're having some comments about this. Here's what they say.
Judge in New York slapped a $5,000 fine, which was just a minor fine because he violated the gag order, But the warning there is that he could actually be imprisoned, Donald Trump, for continuing to threaten court personnel, potential witnesses, prosecutors.
And look, this judge managed to get Donald Trump to take down one of the quote-unquote threatening emails and lies that he put out there.
It wasn't threatening.
Yes,
You're
there's
right.
no question that I think Mr. Trump is in major trouble. Sidney Powell Powell is not just some random lawyer that represented Donald Trump. She was in the Oval Office. She was there when they were concocting this wild-eyed strategy.
Talking about martial law and seizing voting machines.
She wanted to be special prosecutor to do all of this stuff. This, I think, will have a domino effect. And I also think it's going to impact his messaging. When people around him, people who knew what the thinking was, can now be unleashed to testify against him and against others, I think the wheels are going to turn.
All right, so I don't think so. I don't think that Sidney Powell or Kenneth Chesebro is going to do much of anything, and we'll get to that in a later segment. But she's talking about Trump and his reaction to these things and saying that his strategy might change, his voice might change. I think it's going to stay mostly the same. He's going to say that they're all illegitimate everywhere you turn. They're part of a coordinated, orchestrated attack on his candidacy, literally. Okay, you've got Alvin, you've got all of the civil cases. They moved statute of limitations around in New York so that Bergdorf gal could be Bergdorfed, in front of all of us talking Bergdorfing. And it's just that plus the 4 other criminal cases, New York, Florida, Georgia, now DC. It is a full-on attack to remove a candidate that they don't want to win from the field. And so he's, in my opinion, totally within his First Amendment rights, clearly, to comment on it. But they are asking more people about this. So this is Representative Warnock. He shows up on MSNBC's latest show and has a conversation with Inside Jen Psaki. Here's what that sounds like.
There's obviously a big case that's coming up in Fulton County. It's ongoing, of course,
Georgia.
and I'm not going to ask you to predict anything there, but the outcome of that, as a uniter, which I think you definitely are, the outcome of that could be the conviction of Donald Trump, and it could be jail time for Donald Trump. Do you think he should serve jail time if he's convicted?
I believe in equal protection under the law. I believe that nobody is above the law.
What about having your free speech enforced?
And
is anybody below the law? Do some people get free speech rights and some people don't?
Donald Trump deserves his day in court before a jury of his peers.
Oh, like in D.C.?
And in this case, these will be the people of Georgia who I am deeply honored to serve.
And I ask this question because there are different schools of thought that if you put a former president in jail, despite all of the things that he did, that would be a divisive move for the country. There are other things that could happen. He could be in Mar-a-Lago. He could be under house confinement. Do you think there's an approach that would be better for the country moving forward, given that there's also a lot of people who would like to very much see him in jail if he's...
A lot of people out there really enjoying themselves on these conversations, okay? Now, I wasn't intending to get into this. I hadn't listened to this clip before, but we are hearing 2 people really indulging in this where is Trump going to be housed conversation. It gets a little weird out there. We'll play through this clip, but you start to get a little weird. You're going to see a lot more of this as the trials start to percolate. And you might have come across clips where it's like multiple people all just talking amongst themselves about the penalty that Trump is going to endure, and they almost are like giddy. It's really a gross thing. Let's see what happens. I'm not sure.
Convicted.
First of all, let me just say that I do believe in equal protection under the law. Donald Trump, even in the midst of all the things we've heard with him on tape saying, can you find me a few more votes? He's innocent until proven guilty.
That's good. That's true.
And so I don't want to get ahead of that process. I respect the judicial process. But I do think that it is a test of the maturity of a democracy to see whether or not we live up to the principles that we hold up.
We are not. Let me tell you that right now. We are not. Equal protection under the law is a nice thing to say, but when people drop below the law, like when they don't even get free speech, when they don't even get discovery, when they don't even get the evidence to read, how is that equal protection of the law? We're supposed to protect our defendants against this over-encroaching government, but they're having a difficult time on that inside Jen Psaki at MSNBC and the latest show over there. And so, my friends, now we'll get some more rulings on this. Of course, we'll see what the Court of Appeals says when that comes back down. We'll be here continuing to cover. Thank you for inviting someone over here to see exactly what they're doing to Trump and help them understand how this is working, how the mechanics are unfolding in Washington, D.C. Thank you for sending them over here. Thank you for subscribing, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.